Good day to you all. This is Mrs. Ida Joicey, Assistant Professor, St. Joseph's College of Arts and Science, Cuddalore, Tamil Nadu, India. I am happy to meet you all once again in this video class. And today we are going to discuss another very prominent poem related to American literature. The Negro Speaks of Rivers, written by Langston Hughes. Before we get into the poem, it is very important for us all to understand all about who is Langston Hughes and his connection with a very great literary renaissance known as the New Negro Renaissance or the Harlem Renaissance. Langston Hughes is an eminent figure during the 1920s when the blacks were racially segregated and racial injustice was at its height soon after the First World War. He comes to the scene as a representative of his own race. Langston Hughes, if you look at his family background, his mother and father were separated. His father himself, being a black, felt so much inferior to identify himself one with his race. And it was a time when race passing was common, when many of the blacks were striving towards the attainment of being called as white. Black race was considered intellectually impotent or ineffective, physically unattractive, and they are nowhere considered to be human. So this denial of human integrity and the denial of humanity at large sparked a fire. It sparked off a riot in the minds of great intellectuals like Langston Hughes, whose writings are considered to spark off yet another very crucial intellectual movement, which is called to be the Harlem Renaissance. So Harlem Renaissance, otherwise considered to be the New Negro Renaissance, is nothing but a movement which demanded for equality, which fought against racial separation, which questioned the rules of such called to be the Jim Crow law of segregation. And it was a time when the law pronounced that blacks are equal but separate. So though this was the de jure, the condition of de facto was different. So what was in the paper was not put into practice. Men like Langston Hughes took the banner for themselves, representing the whole Negro community. And this great movement, which is called to be the Harlem Renaissance in the history of African American literature, pronounced that blacks are equal and they are supposed to be treated on an equal footing with that of the whites. So against this background, Langston Hughes wrote this small simple poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. Though the poem is very simple, consisting of very simple lines, the poem traces the entire history of the black race, starting from the history of the human civilization. As the title reads, The Negro Speaks of Rivers, here is a Negro, Langston Hughes, who speaks of the rivers, and he strikes a similarity. There is an analogous definition of the Negroes with that of the rivers. So there are certain aspects that come to our minds when we think of the rivers. One of the blessings of nature is rivers. Rivers are endless. Their flow is continuous. Rivers are always associated with immortality. They flow only in one direction. They always flow forward. There is never a regression for the rivers. Rivers are a major source of life. They contain so many lives within themselves, and the rivers are the beds. They are supposed to be the cradle of human civilization. So like that of the rivers, the contribution of the Negro community to the entire human race is boundless, it is fathomless, and it is beyond the definition and comprehension of the human mind. So here this poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers, it is a hymn to that entire Negro race. The Negro race that had been left without any trace, without any history. The Negro race that had been left without any identity is recorded, identified and celebrated in this poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. So we can say that Langston Hughes has paid a very great tribute to his own men in this poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. So to put it in one line, this poem is a hymn to the glory of the Negro race and that of the black heritage. So when you consider the poem, it begins like this. I have known rivers. I have known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I have seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I have known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. So when the writer begins, he says, I have known rivers. So he says that he and the rivers are one and the same. So he is trying to establish a kind of a relationship with that of the rivers. Rivers which are a part of the creation. We know according to the Bible, the book of the Genesis, as it explains the creation. In the process of creation, all physical divisions of this universe were created first. And the last part of creation was that of the creation of a human being. So he says, I have known rivers which are ancient, which are older than the flow of human blood in human veins, which means rivers were first created, and ever since the time of creation, human blood began to flow in human veins. So human blood flowing in human veins refer to the creation of a human being by God. And this creation of human being is supposed to be the best part of God's creation. And we know that human beings are the crown and glory of creation. And so he claims that this Negro race is not somewhere inferior. He was a part of the creation since the time of creation. Soon after the rivers were created, after these rivers which are ancient, human beings, when they come into existence in the history of the universe, in the creation of the world, Negroes were in their being. So right from the time of creation, Hughes calls that these Negroes are a part of creation, or they are a divine creation. These blacks have got a divine soul in themselves. And he says, my soul has grown deep like the rivers. So he is trying to establish an analogy, or he is trying to compare his soul to that of the rivers. So these rivers, they nourish life. They allow the breeding of so many lives within itself. So the soul of a Negro has got the capacity, the perseverance, the sustenance to allow human lives flourish on the earth. So the Negro soul had been instrumental right from the dawn of the civilization for the promotion of the entire human race, not only for the Negro community. This has never been recorded anywhere in the history of the human civilization. So he says, he has recorded all his experiences since the time of the civilization. And he says, with such immense records and impressions, his soul is very deep like that of the rivers. So nobody knows exactly what is the depth of the river. You cannot fathom the soul of a Negro because it is as deep as that of the rivers. And when he speaks about the rivers, he is talking about the 4 major rivers of the world. So he says, I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. So Euphrates is one of the longest rivers of the world. Euphrates, according to historians and archaeologists, Euphrates is supposed to be the cradle of human civilization. Generally, the banks of any river allows life because rivers, water is the basic source of life, and this nourishment you find it on the river. So any river bank is supposed to be the birth and beginning of a civilization, and for that matter, according to history, Euphrates is supposed to be the beginning. It is supposed to be the cradle of human civilization. So when dawns were young, so the poem begins with the dawn and the poem ends with the dusk. So here the dawn and the dusk, it could imply or it could infer to the birth of the human civilization and how it has come down the ages to the present day. So in the beginning of the civilization, the Negro, like every other human race, it had its origin. The Negro community had its origin on the banks of the river Euphrates. Euphrates is the birthplace of human civilization. So he bathed. He bathed in the sense he began his life. So like every other race, the Negro community is also supposed to have originated from the banks of the river Euphrates. And from there, the Negro, he traces his footsteps. It has come to the Congo basin. Congo is yet another longest river that flows through 3 important African cities. And it is Congo river is supposed to have been the birthplace of many African kingdoms. So Africa by itself, it was believed to be the homeland, the origin, the native of these black men. So this dark continent was the habit of this Negro kingdom. These Negroes, as long as they were in Africa, they were very, very comfortable because it was their birthplace. And he says, I slept in the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. So the Congo waves, the rivers, the flow of the rivers, the hush sound of the rivers sounded like a lullaby, and the Negro, he had his peaceful sleep. He was quite at ease in his own homeland. So he says, when he had come to his own motherland, when he had come to Africa by the shore of the Congo, he says, I built my hut near the Congo. So he made his settlement. The Negro made his settlement in the African continent on the banks of the river Congo. And he says, even the shores, the wavy motion of the Congo river seemed to lull him to sleep. So he was comfortable, he was peaceful, and he was a free man in his own homeland. And from Congo, slowly he makes his journey towards Egypt. He says, I crossed the river Nile. And this crossing of the river Nile, it refers to the beginning of the slave trade, when African men, these dark complexioned men who were considered to be inferior, they were traded. This you call it a transatlantic slave trade, which was carried out for almost 300 years. 3 centuries witnessed the horror of slave trade. So a part of the Negroes, they were taken, they were traded like every other goods. These men were traded as slaves from Africa to Egypt through the river Nile. And there these men, the human resource, the manpower of the Negroes was exploited towards the construction of the Egyptian pyramids, which is supposed to be one of the ancient architectural achievements. And so these men, Negroes, when they sailed through the Nile river, they were never put down in their spirits. Rather, they got enough inspiration from the beauty of the Nile river, and that led them towards the creative construction of the Egyptian pyramids. So we should know that one of the wonders of the world is the Egyptian pyramids, and that is purely the craftsmanship of the Negro community. And then from there, Langston Hughes, he talks about how it goes through the Mississippi River, the longest river in America. America was a dreamland. So when Columbus discovered America, the initial settlers from various parts of Europe, they dreamt that they can live in a very free atmosphere, and these Negroes innocently sailed through the Mississippi River to settle down in America. But unfortunately, very pitiably, they have fallen into the state of slavery. And the horrors of slavery was first witnessed by the then President Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, when he sailed through the Mississippi River for the first time, he understood, he had a first-hand report of how slaves had been ill-treated and how to what worst extent they were exploited. And he draws a declaration pronouncing the equality of blacks to the whites. He said that racial segregation is legally banned. So this, when this was over, when Abraham Lincoln takes a ride through the Mississippi for the second time, even the river seems to be celebrating the glory, the achievement and the administration of Abraham Lincoln, for he had the courage and he had the humanity to pronounce equality of the blacks with that of the whites. And when this had happened, Langston Hughes says that he could find the muddy bosom of the Mississippi River turned golden in the sunset. So this is again an imagery. The muddy river, it is turning ups and downs. It is getting upside down, and it is appearing muddy at the same time because it is dusky. It is the dusky part of the day. Due to the golden rays of the sun, the river seemed to be glittering golden in color. And when Abraham Lincoln sailed, when this river turns golden, it implies with the journey of Abraham Lincoln, the golden era of the blacks have started, because Abraham Lincoln had willed to himself. He had decided within his heart to proclaim equality for the Negroes. So these are the impressions that Langston Hughes records, starting from the journey of the birth of the civilization in the Euphrates. He travels across. The Negro is put under different trials in different continents. Ultimately, when he comes to America, he finds that there is a better prospect for the Negro in the hands of good thinkers like Abraham Lincoln. So once again, with all these impressions, he says, I have known rivers. He repeats the first line, I have known rivers. So this I here, it is not Hughes, it is not the speaker just, but it is the voice of the entire Negro community, which has recorded so much of impression, so much of ups and downs down the ages. And these these impressions have made his soul very deep like that of the rivers, and this human soul, this black soul is very deep like the rivers which are ancient and which are dust. So through this poem, the writer Langston Hughes actually he wrote it as a teenager. When he was just 17 years, he wrote this poem, and this poem is supposed to have published in the year 1920, and it is considered to be one of the key defining poem of the Harlem Renaissance movement. It is included in his collection The Weary Blues, one of the famous anthology written by Langston Hughes is The Weary Blues, and this was actually dedicated to another Negro forward thinker, W.E.B. Du Bois, and this poem is so famous that it is considered to be the hymn of the Negro race, and it was so popular at that time. Though he never had any connection at the time of writing, Hughes had no connection with Harlem. He never experienced the life in Harlem, but later this poem seemed to be the framework for leading the movement which later came to be known as the New Negro Renaissance, Harlem Renaissance, or the Black Literary Renaissance. And this poem, it was so popular, and you can claim Hughes to be the poet laureate of the Harlem Renaissance based on this poem. And it was so famous to such an extent that when Hughes passed away in the year 1967, this poem was read out in the funeral ceremony of Langston Hughes. So altogether, this poem gives us the history of the black race. Where did the blacks originate? How are they comparable with the rivers? And how are they equal with the rest of the human race? There is nothing to feel inferior, and there is nothing gloomy connected with the lives of the blacks. The blacks have their own identity, though it is unnamed in the ancient history. It is with men like Langston Hughes we find the blacks stand by their own selves. However, they are crushed. Even in the present scenario, we find the death of George Floyd. All this makes us understand that democracy is still in the darkness with regard to the lives of the black people, yet they will emerge as a powerful race. So to that, what extent they are crushed and treated harshly, that gives the molding, the shape, the courage and the determination to bounce back to fight for equality. So equality of the blacks to the whites is always remaining a challenge. These poems, like The Negro Speaks of Rivers, allows us to contemplate on what is humanity, where lies the individual human integrity, and to what extent America can be a democratic country. So with this thought for you to ponder, I conclude. Thank you.